Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
Okay, let's go to Webster Griffin Tarpley, who'll be with us for 20 minutes or so. Appreciate him coming on short notice. They say Mubarak has stepped down, give us your breakdown on this.
Well, it appears that he has stepped down. That's the announcement from Vice President Suleiman on the official Egyptian television. So until we learn something else, let's assume that's true, although we've been burned a few times. I think what you've got to ask yourself is, what kinds of threats were delivered overnight by the U.S. government to Egypt? I can imagine yesterday evening Obama chewing the carpet in the White House in an absolute fit of rage, threatening to fire Panetta for his bungling incompetence and stupidity, basically wanting to fire the Director of National Intelligence. This is all what I imagine going on. But chewing the carpet in rage. And then, of course, you could see this reflected on television. Somebody like David Gergen, always connected to the various White Houses, saying, this cannot be allowed to stand, because if Mubarak can stand up to the U.S., then you've got a partial collapse, at least, of U.S. imperialism in the area that they have, for some reason, defined as the most important in the world.
And from 3 weeks ago, you have been proven correct. It's now admitted, and the White House, and they all admit that they basically funded the opposition groups and triggered this. And do you still follow the same line of reasoning that this is the first domino in a destabilization program? That's basically what Brzezinski and Herr Kissinger have said now.
That is what they hope it is. Now, this has now been another object lesson for those who have foolishly forgotten about the fate of the Shah and Marcos and so many others. They've now seen this again. So I think a lot of people are going to be mobilized. If you listen to the soft power group, and this is not the neocons now, this is the Joseph Nye International Crisis Group, soft power, subversive destabilization group, you can see that.
So Soros is involved. Soros is involved.
Soros is involved. Right? That's the International
So
Crisis
Glenn Beck's
Group.
right. Glenn Beck's right.
Oh, of course. Well, I don't know Glenn Beck. This is
no, but I mean Glenn Beck. I mean, he started saying that a week after you started saying it. And I'm glad he's getting the truth from this show. But the evidence is all right there.
Anyway, the International Crisis Group is money from Soros and the ideological direction from Brzezinski. They're all saying now, on to Syria, on to Saudi Arabia, on to Iran, on to China, on to Russia. Why not? There's no limit to the attempts of these people. This is now going to be Obama's election campaign, is to say, I'm better than Bush, because Bush bogged you down in this tremendously expensive, catastrophic war, but I can overthrow countries simply using soft power.
Tarpley, you really are incredible. You really are incredible, because you did say here 3 years ago, during the middle of the Obama campaign, that he was going to use kamikaze puppets and that they were going to overthrow countries through popular color revolution rebellions George Soros funded. And that is exactly what they've been doing. So let's continue when we come back and break that down. Now, you did miscalculate a bit. You thought Mubarak might be able to hold on. Now, to be clear, the reason I bring Glenn Beck up is that we get a good indication of where the U.S. media is, starting about 2 weeks ago, about a week after Tarpley laid out the facts here, and others did. Beck came out and said, why are they trying to put the Muslim Brotherhood in? You know, they're radical Muslims that want to have war with Israel. Well, not really. They're British intelligence run, and that's on record. So he only goes so far. But the media attacked him, saying, how dare he support a dictator when he wasn't? And some of the media attacked yours truly, saying, look, even Jones, is saying, don't kick Mubarak out. I didn't say that. I said the globalists triggered this. They admit they triggered it. George Soros is in there funding it. These are not nice people. They want to now overthrow all these puppet dictatorships. They even put out rumors yesterday that the king of Saudi Arabia had died. Looks like, was that true? I think it turned out that it wasn't. I mean, there's all these destabilization programs going on. The Muslim Brotherhood saying overthrow Jordan, overthrow Yemen, overthrow Saudi Arabia. China's trying to lock down all this news. This is the global strategy. What are they trying to get out of this, Webster?
Well, let's look at what has now happened in Egypt. You now have a military junta. This is now a military government. Part of the exit deal, whatever threats were made to Mubarak, the imprisonment of his son or who knows what, he is now given power, not according to the Constitution, but to the military council. In other words, Mubarak's last deed was to shred the Constitution and delegate power, which I don't know how he can do it because he doesn't have such a power, at least in theory. It's now the military council. So it's a military junta that is now running the country. And this is now, it's a CIA military coup. These crowds that you see on television, I assure you, have absolutely nothing to do with what happened behind the scenes. This was pure great power threats exercised by the U.S. against Egypt. The difference between Iran and Egypt is that Iran is basically an enemy state from the U.S. point of view. They don't have that leverage, whereas with Egypt they have all kinds of leverage, starting with the food situation. Now, the purpose of this military junta, military dictatorship, because that's what you have, and it's an oligarchy, is to, I believe, roll back this refusal by Mubarak to enter into the U.S. nuclear umbrella, this proposal from the summer of 2009, where Obama came forward and said, we want to have Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and so forth, all under U.S. nuclear protection. And this amounts to assembling a war alliance, a military front of Sunni Arab states with the Israelis and the U.S. sticking into it, and play this all against Iran. Think of the Brzezinski parallels under Carter. This is just the first step, what we've just seen. This is now the creation of this military government. Where is this military government going to go? If it can't solve internal problems, which I doubt it can, if it stays under the IMF and the World Bank, then you're going to need some glory. Well, where are you going to get glory? Well, maybe you start picking fights with Iran over some issue, right? Think about how Brzezinski went from the Iran overthrow in 1978-79 to very quickly the destabilization of Afghanistan and then getting the Soviets into that. It ends in war. War is now closer. That is what these people have to understand. On NPR this morning, they're saying, oh, these wonderful demonstrators, they should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, no, they should get the War Prize because they have now brought a general war with Iran closer. The Iranians have not publicly said that this is the case. The Iranians, I'm afraid, have been somewhat opportunistic and piling on this, greeting Tunisia and Egypt as an Islamic revolution. They're not. These are CIA.
Yeah, they don't see the
coups.
trap. They don't see the trap they're being led into. What about suddenly all these presidents and prime ministers, England, France, saying Muslims are bad and multiculturalism failed? I mean, we really see the war propaganda gearing up for this World War III scenario.
It's quite possible. The other thing I would stress is, suppose this government is in good faith, right? Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, which I really don't. But what could they do? The first thing they ought to do is raise the minimum wage. Mubarak had just raised the wages of the public employees, but that came too late to make any difference. They should lower the price of bread, cooking oil, and fuel. The big thing that this government ought to do, if they're really patriotic, take advantage of the international goodwill for Egypt right now, which is existing, created by the media. Declare a debt moratorium. Freeze your debt. Stop paying. Stop paying the International Monetary Fund. Stop paying the European Bank. Stop paying the City of London. Stop paying Wall Street. And say, oh, we have to do this because Mubarak has looted our country. Use that as a story. And get Egypt out from under this crushing debt burden and the other strictures that have been put on them. And of course, then you could begin to think about expanding the Suez Canal, developing the Nile. This Ibrahim Kamel, part of Mubarak's circle, the guy who fought to try to keep him in power, has a whole plan on his website how you can develop the huge desert areas of Egypt by pumping out the water from the Nile.
All right, stay there, Webster. I want to look on a larger geopolitical pullback and what you see the globalists doing in the future. So, bottom line, Mubarak would not go along with giving his support to an attack on Iran. The globalists want chaos in the region as a pretext to continue to have forces there and to expand that presence. And this is the stated policies of the Soros crew, of Zbigniew Brzezinski, of Henry Kissinger. And Webster, I understand you want to see Egypt thrive, you want to see development, but I don't see the globalists allowing that. We know the IMF World Bank policy is to use debt and high interest rates to keep countries in squalor so that they can never properly develop, so they're basically under the control of this soft economic imperium. So shifting gears away from that, who are the different factions there? Who is the Muslim Brotherhood? Give us a brief tutorial on the admitted history of radical Islam being funded, financed, and protected to radicalize the Muslim world as a pretext to produce a clash of civilizations. And where do you see this going? Not where you want to see it go, but where do you see this New World Order operation going?
Well, in Egypt, it's very clear that the Muslim Brotherhood was created by the British in the late 1920s as an antidote to at the time that the country was a British colony. It was an attempted antidote by the British to the WAFD party, W-A-F-D, which had a strong nationalist and anti-British component to it. It was a parliamentary party. So the British created the Muslim Brotherhood as a counterweight. And the Muslim Brotherhood was generally not agitating against the British colonialism, but rather agitating against the local governments on these themes of what we could call social issues. Now, during the 60s, 50s, and 60s into the 70s, the Muslim Brotherhood attempted to sabotage the modernization of Egypt, especially because they were opposed to Nasser. Now, Nasser, of course, had many problems, but he had tremendous merits, and the biggest merit is that huge Aswan High Dam, which is the centerpiece of the economic development of the whole country in the past half-century. I would say that the Muslim Brotherhood has factions in it that have mellowed during the 80s, 90s, and into the current decade, but the idea of a government where the Muslim Brotherhood would have total power, I think, would be a very bad thing.
But they are calling, let me just stop you, they are calling, now let's go on to Egypt. I mean, from Egypt to Saudi Arabia to Jordan to Yemen,
sure.
They are calling for this, and strangely we see Iran saying they like it. We see the globalists funding it, obviously, to try to get the radicals into power or to use them to further destabilize. Then the globalists can come in and fill that vacuum with other coalition weak puppet governments that they can control. But I want to play this brief clip from Henry Kissinger a few weeks ago saying that this Mubarak situation is only the first scene in the first act of a larger play. Here it is.
There's no possibility that they won't in a democratic process. The question is whether other parties can emerge that balance them.
Dr. Kissinger, before I leave you, what advice would you give Secretary Clinton right now as she's dealing with this?
Well, I would talk as little publicly as possible because we don't really know what is going on. We are generally, I think the conduct of our government has been generally in the right direction for the same goals. We should not have any illusions, however. We are going to go through a period of great uncertainty and of a lot of maneuvering once the lid is off. Right now, everybody's focused on the removal of Mubarak. That is only the first scene of the first act of a drama that has to be played out.
All right.
And this act you see...
So, Webster, what I'm saying here is the global technocrats, the Anglo-American establishment, Britain, the U.S., Israel, they wouldn't be going with this destabilization program if they weren't confident. I'm asking you, what is their stratagem? I mean, we know the general stratagem, but what do you see them doing next?
Well, remember, they talk big, and they always promise more than they can deliver. And maybe it's not that they're confident. Maybe it's that they're desperate, and this is a flight forward on other issues, mainly the dollar. Right now, they have a military junta. These are the generals. These are mainly generals chosen by Mubarak. Let's look at the tradition in Egypt. It's the tradition of the colonels. In the 1950s, you had the overthrow of King Farouk, who had been backed by the British. And then you had a kind of a transitional situation, which may be where we are now, and then the coup d'etat of the colonels around Nasser, which gave you about the best government in the Middle East that you had during this entire period of several decades. So let's look maybe somewhere in the Egyptian army. There are some radicalized colonels who see the humiliation of their country, a coup d'etat proclaimed by the head of the CIA from Washington. They must be mortified beyond belief. So maybe there's a counter force emerging there. I think that's a real worry for the Anglo-Americans, that you might have some modernizing, pro-development, non-Mubarak, non-dictatorial, but authoritarian types in the Egyptian military. Perfectly possible. Other than that, the soft power group, the people who believe in subversion, not bombing, but using these methods of the people power coup, the color revolution, the postmodern coup, they would undoubtedly set their sights on Syria. What are the chances in Syria? Well, on the one side, Syria is a very highly developed police state, maybe more so than Egypt. I think a lot more so than Egypt. On the other hand, it has an ethnic minority ruler. The Assad family represent this very small Alawite ethnic minority, which is ethnically different from the vast majority of the Syrian population. So they're a target. They'll undoubtedly target Jordan. Now there it's significantly harder because of the way in which the monarchy is rooted in the clan and even tribal structure of the country. So far, there's no movement against the Hashemite dynasty represented by the current king. And then we get to Saudi Arabia. Let's see what might happen here. We had this idea that Prince Bandar, about 18 months ago, was attempting to play the Russian card. And there was a crackdown on him. And the last I heard of him, he was put under house arrest. If you can imagine King Abdullah and maybe more active people in the royal family, they look at the fate of Mubarak. What are they going to do? They're going to say, call Beijing, call Moscow, call people in, let's play these other cards. The U.S. may be, therefore, impelled to try a coup in Saudi Arabia to prevent Saudi Arabia from developing fallback options that would allow them to escape from this situation of one-way dependency on the U.S. Then you can look at some other countries, Algeria. You've got Bouteflika there. He's been there for quite a while. They'd like to target him. It's a very big oil producer. And, of course, the net idea, all of these countries use them against Russia, use them against China, use them against Iran. That's the bottom line. And whereas Mubarak said, I'm not interested in that, that doesn't help me, get lost, scram, beat it. Now you're going to have governments that will say, oh, yes, of course, Mr. Obama, we'll be so happy to carry out your anti-Chinese, anti-Iranian, anti-Russian policies. And I'm afraid that's what has changed. If Obama wants to go and do something for Egypt in his speech at 1:30, instead of more of this hot air, blasé rhetoric that he usually comes up with, announce an immediate large-scale food aid shipment. Let's get several million tons of grain to Egypt right now and avoid starvation.
Because that would put a salve on a lot of the instability, but they probably want the instability to continue so they can jockey around in there and try to get who they want in power.
Exactly. I think the U.S. card is now simply shoot the works for chaos, destabilization, and mob rule, and that's what we've seen. But again, remember, the mob you see in the street is simply an illusion, right? It's a smokescreen, it's a prop. These are the walk-on parts in this drama. The real stuff goes on behind the scenes, and what kinds of threats were delivered to Mubarak, to Suleiman, to this Tantawi, to Enan, the head of the Egyptian military. That, I think, will be the interesting thing to find out.
Well, let me just interject. Going back 3 weeks ago, the media kept saying he will step down today, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy to really bolster the destabilization and the protest. And they just kept announcing it. And then when they shot the works yesterday and Panetta said, oh, he'll step down today, and then Mubarak came out and gave a speech and didn't step down, you had called that yesterday on air, hours before it happened. You had said that he's trying to hold on right now and that they've basically given him the order and already issued the threats, and that he still may not step down. But then when he did, that shows that there was incredible pressure being put on them, and we've seen Israel in the last 5 days threatening to basically invade or to attack Egypt, saying we're now on a war footing. But publicly, Israel's been claiming they have support for Mubarak. So
yeah, again, probably a double policy. It's fairly common. But the thing that Mubarak has done, I think, in departing, whatever else he's done, is by staying and fighting for this 2-week period, Mubarak has established in front of the eyes of the world, this is a CIA coup. This is not this gaggle of nihilists in the square. This has nothing to do with these crowds. This was a top-down CIA operation with heavy-duty threats. God knows.
Well, they sent Al-Baradi in, who hadn't been there in a long time, the week before, and he started giving basically overthrow speeches, and then it came out in the headlines, U.S. behind protesters, and then now the West is saying, yes, he will step down today. I mean, they basically admit that they did this. And then you've got Google, that's a known NSA, CIA admitted creation now. You know, don't be evil, what a joke. And then they've got one of their minions in there, you know, to help manipulate the technotronic technocracy. I mean, this is, go over that constellation of pure evidence briefly that this was a Western coup.
Well, we have now the television celebrating this guy, Gonim, this character you see, not charismatic, but a Google executive. They're celebrating Gonim as the founder of the revolution. So again, if it was Robespierre in France and Lenin in Russia and maybe Mao in China, now we have Gonim. This is impossible. This guy is a little mouse. This is a little nothing. We also have this interesting fact that the main group among the young nihilists in the square is this April 6th organization, which happens to be a clone of the original Color Revolution group, which is the Otpor group in Serbia, left over from 1999-2000 when the U.S.
And George Soros isn't hiding that. I mean, they're not hiding the fact that they're in there manipulating this.
No, they exchange love notes in public on the internet. You can see what's left of Otpor, basically nothing. But the old veterans of Otpor are sending love notes to the April 6th and vice versa. And, of course, we also have the Daily Telegraph reports that the entire plan that we've just seen as far as the public square part, right, the people power aspect, all of this was worked out in the United States in late 2008, just as Obama was taking power here with a similar operation.
Is what you said on air. You said they're shifting away from open military invasion and the conquering, and they're shifting to the Brzezinski model of destabilize, have revolutions, overthrow, and then out of the chaos, put your people in, and then use that country as a kamikaze against the next.
And that will be one of Obama's main arguments to the Wall Street people when he comes around for contributions, saying, look, re-elect me because I give you everything you want without the expense of a war, without the upheaval, without the movements. The problem with that is that works fine on your own client state, right? You can stab your own ally in the back. That's easier than fighting Iran with a color revolution, whereas the Iranians, of course, fight back. The Chinese have fought back in the past, right, at Tiananmen. So it's much harder.
What was the 888? I mean, that was admittedly a NATO situation. Was that a test of Russia?
I'm sorry, which one?
What was 888? I mean, was that a test of Russia? Why did they do that?
What, the attack on Georgia?
Yes.
Well, this was simply it was an attempt by people from this Brzezinski orbit, or people who came from the Brzezinski orbit. This madman Saakashvili, fascist warmonger there in Georgia, went berserk and tried to start something. And this was simply an attempt, I think, to get the attention back towards the big strategic issues, which are things around Russia and China and India. So, yeah, that's just it was a kind of a calling card from Brzezinski.
Which shows how reckless these people are, because the Russians admittedly rolled mobile nukes in, and their Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman went on television and said, we're preparing for nuclear war with NATO, and then the West backed off, which it's insane.
Yeah, it is insane. And what you always see is the question of the nation state or the empire. Unfortunately, the empire has won against the nation state. Yesterday, the nation state was briefly in the lead, whatever else you want to think. But today, the empire has, at least for the moment, triumphed. The problem that the CIA has is you take a U.S. asset and put that person into power. From the moment that they take power, the apparatus of the nation state begins to capture them and forces them to act more and more like a national leader, less and less like a foreign agent. And that's what happened to Mubarak. He had become really a national leader from his own point of view.
Yeah, it was the same thing with Saddam, also put in by the West.
The internal form of these dictatorships is simply the typical form of a government in an underdeveloped third world segment of the U.S. empire, and that's pretty uniform. It doesn't seem to vary
Well, Webster,
very much.
what do you think about people like Ray McGovern, who thinks this is overall going to be positive, and he thinks El-Barity's a good guy because he, said WMDs weren't in Iraq?
I'm afraid that once you've served in the CIA, you never quite get over it. I think that you can see a kind of a body of opinion that corresponds to the U.S. intelligence community. The left liberals who used to oppose Bush and Cheney have now, I think, completely discredited themselves, that they were imperialists all along, that they had a beef with Bush Cheney about methods, but not about goals. They're interested in a U.S. world empire, and they said, don't use military means, use our subversive means. However, even so, what has happened in Egypt is a defeat for the U.S. world empire. The empire, in some ways, has been more weakened by this than by other possible outcomes, simply because it is now so clear that the CIA has done it. In other words, the whole nature of this project is to tear down the existing empire with the hope of reforming it, but that may not go well. Certainly, Egypt now enters into a period of prolonged chaos and instability. And again, I would urge Obama, send a few million tons of grain if you have any concern about Egypt, because that's what they need more than your hot air.
Well, for folks that say we can't do that, we're already giving them foreign aid, and the bankers want another $100 trillion of our tax money. Why can't we give, $1 billion of grain to them if it stops a chain reaction that leads to Middle East-wide war? Webster, thank you so much for spending time with us. We'll talk to you again in the next few days as this unfolds.
See you soon, and keep up with me on Twitter.
All right. Hi, Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show Live. We're going to get Joe Seahusen of Liberty Guard back on next week to talk about yet another FOIA request that they've launched in the continuing backlash against Big Sis and the TSA. We're going to go to your calls for Bob Chapman at the bottom of the hour, who, of course, needs no introduction. He's the founder and editor of International Forecaster financial newsletter at internationalforecaster.com. The phone-in number is 800-259-9231. That's 800-259-9231. Bob, great to speak to you again. Good to have you back on the show today.
Well, thank you very much. And as always, on Friday, I'm very happy to be here.
Now, the IMF is out again repeating their call for the SDR to replace the dollar as this embryonic global reserve currency. And, of course, we know from previous IMF documents that were published last year that this SDR transference is merely a stepping stone to the eventual implementation of a truly global currency that will be controlled by a global central bank. And they've even named what the global currency will be called. It's the Bancor currency. Bob, given the fact that the global elite already have such a tight grip on the global economy, why do they need this global currency?
I think more than anything else, it's a control factor. If you go back to 1969, when the SDR was invented, so to speak, it came at a time when they tried to use it as a substitute for gold. And it turned out very badly. Gold ran up, and after 1971, it ran up some more. And then in 1978, the IMF sold gold, and so the SDR never got any headway, and I don't think it ever will. Under the rules, they cannot be gold-backed SDRs. And it's my personal opinion after these many years that there is no system that can work without gold backing. And the reason why is the temptation is so great that people are always going to print more money or create more credit than they should. And it's been shown over and over again. I was writing an article this morning for tomorrow's issue, and I talked about China. And if anybody has any experience with this, the Chinese do. I mean, they've been printing paper money, and I think they were the first ones to do it, for almost 1,000 years. And it was better than having iron or copper coins, because the iron ones were really heavy. And so they have found that in using a currency without backing, it's always collapsed. And they know that very well, and so does all of these people like Bernanke and Greenspan and so on, who are, quote, financial experts like myself. They believe that they can do it again, and it isn't going to happen. And, of course, it's going to happen. And so the SDR isn't going to work. The Banco isn't going to work. Keynesianism is not working. And it really is, after all these years of studying it and looking at it, Keynesianism is nothing more than corporatist economic fascism. And it's to underlyingly create monopolies that control governments. And the only thing that's going to work is either a conglomeration of currencies, maybe 5 or 10 or 20, put together. They all have gold backing, and they all have a percentage interest in the unit, in an index. Or they could go back to the dollar after it's devalued, and they've written off their debt like all the other currencies would, that perhaps the dollar would be backed again, say, with 25% gold. And if that happened, it would work fine. August the 15th, 1971 was the year that this whole thing really started to come unglued. And there's no way back for them. The only thing they can do is back another currency with gold, whatever it is, and it's not going to be the SDR.
Now, I mean, basically the SDR is a basket of currencies. You've got the dollar, the euro, the yen, the British pound. But now we're hearing calls to include the Chinese yuan in this basket of SDR currencies. Is this a move to kind of exalt China as the new global powerhouse while, you know, the U.S. empire fades?
Yes, I think it is. And the Chinese problems are every bit as serious as America's problems. I mean, you go from province to province, inflation varies widely, but if you go to Guangdong and you decide to go shopping in Hong Kong, which is not too far away, you'll find that you'll save an average of about 35% in cost. So what is Chinese inflation? They say it's 5.25%, maybe 15, maybe 20%, but it all depends on what province you're in, and that's always been that way in China. What is American inflation? They say it's 1.5%. I say it's 6.75%. And QE1 and the stimulus, the first one, will take inflation to 14% this year, followed by QE2 and the stimulus 2 that you saw in the tax package, which I call the pork package. And where's that going to push it to? 20 or 30%? No, this is really serious. And it's the only way they can keep the system going. They don't have any choice. They can't raise interest rates, and they can't stop pumping money in. And, of course, when that happens, all of the currencies fall against gold and silver. And I know the other day Max Kaiser was on with Alex, and he said the same thing. And over the last 10 out of 11 years, the average loss of the nine largest currencies over that period was 15.25%, and with silver it was 20.38%. So it's an ongoing situation where all currencies are falling in value against gold and silver, and the reason why they are is that they continue to create money and credit, and there's a number of ways to do it, which I won't go into, and they're destroying the currencies, and the only way to protect yourself is go to gold and silver.
And of course, on the subject of inflation, of course, unlike the Federal Reserve, the Bank of China is constantly hiking up interest rates to try and cope with it. We had, of course, you're predicting 14% real inflation in the United States by the end of the year. Last week, I wrote an article based on what the National Inflation Association were saying, and basically they were saying that everything that we've seen unfold on the streets of Cairo over the past 2 or 3 weeks will come to resemble American cities by 2015, they said. Of course, food inflation and food shortages were two of the primary reasons why the revolution in Egypt was started in the first place. You had Egyptians spending 40% of their income on food alone as a result of the inflation that had taken place. In America, it's roughly, at the moment, it's roughly 13% of income is spent on food. But Bob, we've got the money supply. It's going to have risen by 192% by the time QE2 is finished, and that's not even taking into account QE3 and QE4, as you mentioned. Tell us how this inflation is going to impact Americans over the next few years, and what can they do about it? Is it just buying gold, or is it a combination of that and storable food? What can people do to prepare for this inflationary holocaust?
Well, it's what we've talked about for a long time on this program and others, and it's dehydrated, freeze-dried foods, a water filter, and something to defend your family. Very, very important, because today it's very difficult to keep your job, and if you're lucky enough to that, you won't need it right away, the food. On the other hand, people are getting laid off left and right. Big corporations, they haven't hired much at all, and that's how they are improving their bottom line. So I expect, in fact, I did a program this morning on Press TV in Tehran, and I was talking about the reason why we would not have better employment figures. We're looking at, if you check the birth-death ratio, which is the birth and death of jobs, and that was something that was thought up in order to manipulate the employment figures. If you throw that out and you add its component to the U6, which is 16.38%, you come up at 22.6% real employment. Now, you've got municipalities and states who are going to have to lay off because of the tremendous debt that they have. Some of them will go bankrupt as well. And then you also have returning veterans, and there's a fair amount of them. And they are finding it almost impossible to get a job. I get 4 or 5 letters a day from college graduates. What do I do? What do I do? And you just keep on trying. And some people will say, well, I'll take anything I can get. And then they go to get a job, and everybody in there is an illegal alien. So they can't find a job sweeping floors or collecting garbage, the lower order jobs, even though they're willing to take them. And so it's going to get worse before it gets better.
We're talking to Bob Chapman, internationalforecaster.com. Now, Business Insider article today, 11 countries at risk of becoming the next Egypt. And you read this article, and there seems to be a common theme. Every single country on the list has high inflation, soaring food costs, and high unemployment, which of course is exactly what we're facing now in America. Bob, they say that, you know, every society's 3 meals away from a revolution. It's a question we've asked many times. What will it take for American cities to resemble the scenes that we've been witnessing in Egypt over the past couple of weeks? Is it going to come down to food shortages and inflation to really kick things off?
Well, on this and on other programs, I've said many times, when asked what is going to snap these people into gear who are hesitant, don't want to know, see the evidence but don't care. And I always said, empty bellies. And we're on the cusp of that. And it's caused for 2 reasons, floods and droughts, poor crops. And then on top of it, you have a flight to quality in investment. The stock market, yes, it's up. It's up because of the money that the Federal Reserve has poured into, in this instance, purchasing treasuries and agencies, bonds. That's Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie, and FHA bonds, besides treasuries. And that allows other investors, professional, banking, brokerage houses, speculators, to speculate in the market because they don't have to spend any money trying to purchase bonds because the Fed's already doing it. And so that excessiveness of money that's in the system has gone into the market. But there are those who are saying, no, this is not going to stand up. They just saw the bond market, U.S. 10 Treasury note, go from 220 to 374 today. And that's 1.5 points. And that means that we're going to see 30-year fixed-rate mortgages probably in the vicinity of 5.5 to 5.625%, because I think that figure for the 10 will go from 374 to 4% or 4.25% in that area before it rests again, so to speak. When you put all these things together and investors are saying, no, I don't want to be there, so I'll go over and do commodities, gold and silver. And that's what they've been doing. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, that the commodity index, the CRB index, is still about 60 points from its high 3 years ago. And so I think the high is going to be broken because the money that's flowing into commodities is going to push prices up. It's not only food. It's also base metals, gold and silver, platinum, palladium, and cotton, and on and on. And that's going to continue because it's a safe harbor. And who's going to pay for it? The poorer countries of the world at first. Riots, revolutions, starvation, particularly starvation. And that'll be followed in perhaps a year or two by problems in bigger, more wealthy nations, such as the United States, Western Europe, maybe even Canada. And I think that that is what's going to finally give that shove to individuals within that society, particularly with higher unemployment. It's going to give it the shove that's going to bring the people in the streets in the same way that it brought them into the streets recently in Tunisia and Egypt. And that's the way it's headed. So the group that you cited, the NIA, is probably right. And I'm probably right as well. How long it will take remains to be seen. I can't answer that, and I don't think anybody can. But that's where we're headed.
Now, you mentioned gold. I wanted to get your take on this one. We'll probably take your answer after the break. But considering the fact that Goldman Sachs habitually do the opposite of what they tell their clients, it's interesting today that they've put out a note saying that basically the gold rally's over, the US dollar's going to get stronger, and that everything's going to be hunky-dory. We'll get Bob Chapman's take on that after the break. We'll also go to your calls, 800-259-9231. Stay tuned. We're back. It's the Alex Jones Show with Bob Chapman of the International Forecaster. Bob, Goldman Sachs habitually do the opposite of what they tell their clients to do. Now they're saying that the U.S. economy is set for a rapid recovery, that gold's going to flop, that the U.S. dollar will get stronger. Does that mean it's the perfect time to buy gold?
Well, it certainly is an indication that it could be. You know, you have to look at Lloyd Blankenfein, and he says, we're doing God's work. And, you know, this is the attitude that these people have. And you're right. They do and want to do the opposite of what they tell the public. And there's no controlling that. It's just like when they write and they speak, they don't even tell you their positions. And a good example is their trading departments. I mean, they may be talking about buying the stock, and their trading department may very well be short the stock. And so there's no control whatsoever over what they do. But the answer straight up is yes. Gold and silver are going higher. There's no way they can keep it down. Inflation's going higher. Unemployment, at best, will go sideways. And this is going to continue for the next few years. When are they going to try to straighten out the dollar situation? Probably when it drops below 71.18 on the USDX. It's around 77.5 right now. And that will become a reality. When? I don't know, and neither does anybody else. But that's the direction that we're headed. You pick the trend and you stay with it, because the trend is your friend. And you don't have to trade. You just get long and stay long. And that's what this saving your capital is all about, by being in gold and silver related assets. I think over the next 2 years that the price of food will double again. I mean, we put up with all of their reduced size of packages, and you're going to buy a box of cereal, instead of getting, let's say, 20 ounces, you now get 10 for the same price. I mean, it's incredible. In fact, some of the supermarkets are having specials, and you get 2 for 1, and you pay $5 for this 2 boxes of cereal, so that you'll come back when the special isn't on any longer and buy 1 for $5. And so that's the way it's going. They'll continue to do it. Every industry is doing it, and the government's lying about it, and it's going to end up in very, very bad situation.
Cody in Arizona, you're on the air with Bob Chapman. Go ahead, Cody.
Hey, guys. I wanted to bring an article up. I know Paul, you wrote on this. Napolitano secretly hosts terrorist organizations in D.C. And, this was put out by Judicial Watch back in February 18th of 2010. And in it states that among them was the terrorist Muslim Brotherhood, which is a sort of a parent organization of Hamas and Al-Qaeda. And then it also goes on to state that the secret event was part of President Obama's innovative program aimed at creating an information sharing network with Muslim organizations, even those known extremist ties and terrorist connections. So I wanted to ask you if you guys both could agree that there's a tie, there's a Western hand in what's going on in Egypt right now. And we know it's all affecting our financial stability here as well as over there.
Well, I wish you'd asked me the question 3 weeks ago, because that's what I've been talking about. And not many people have come up with this take on what has happened in Tunisia and in Egypt. And that is, I think it was deliberately created because the groundwork was there in order to be a distraction for what was going on with the municipal crisis in the United States, along with the Fed financing the Treasury debt, and then also the problems in Europe. And they didn't mind letting Mubarak go. He stolen $70 billion, and he'll be their friend until he dies. He's 82 years old, so that's probably not very long. And they wanted Suleiman to take over. and they didn't think that they were going to run into the problems that they did. And so when they did, it just threw their problems, I might say, into the toilet. And they don't know what they're going to do now in relation to who's going to run the country. But I got to tell you something. The Muslim Brotherhood was formed in the 1920s, and they were a very fascistic organization and still are. And they sent 2 divisions of men to fight on the Eastern Front with Germany against the Russians who were advancing toward Germany. And so that's their overall background, plus their affiliation with Hamas. And the Central Intelligence Agency has been very close to the Muslim Brotherhood and even financed them from time to time. And so what are we going to get? Well, if we get Suleiman, we'll get the same old thing back, and they'll have another dictator. If we get the Muslim Brotherhood, then even if they only have a majority and have to have a coalition government, you're going to still have problems. But the bottom line is the U.S. government and their actions, as far as I can see, in that area have been a big mistake. They should have never taken that risk. It was not worth it, because anything can happen, especially when people are hungry and living on $2 a day. I mean, you people saw 3, 4, 5 million people on the streets. I mean, they were not going to go away. And finally, for American production, the Mubarak resigns in the middle of the night so he can be on daytime television in America. But the military has taken over. And under the circumstances, at least temporarily, it's probably the best thing to happen, because Suleiman is not controlling them. And he was very deeply involved in the movement of so-called terrorists in the program that the CIA had, and they would send them to Egypt and torture them there. He ran that program for the CIA. So you can see better what you're dealing with here. And so it's going to be a while, perhaps a month or 2, before we find out what kind of government they're going to have. But that's what I think happened.
And, of course, we had the U.S. Embassy document where it's admitted that the CIA knew that this plan to overthrow Mubarak was in the works for 2011. They received this information through their informants in December 2008. So basically they had 2 years to prepare for this. And, of course, now that Mubarak is out of there, you've got this El Baradi character, who is a complete front for George Soros and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is being touted as one of the presidential candidates to take power whenever they stage an election. And stage would probably be the appropriate word from what we've seen in Afghanistan and Iraq with these kind of elections, which is, of course, not to say that the protesters don't have genuine grievances. We talked about that earlier in the show with the food inflation. But there's no doubt that this protest was hijacked by NATO, by Brzezinski, by Soros, and these kind of globalist parties to turn it to their own end. And that's what they planned to do all along. So we'll see what happens in the aftermath now that Mubarak has announced his resignation today. Zach in Canada, you're on the air with Bob Chapman. Go ahead, Zach.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good. What's your question for Bob Chapman today?
Actually, I got a question for you there, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
The Bill C-36 and in Canada here got passed in like December, and the same week they passed the Senate Bill 210.
What's Bill C-36?
C-36, it's their food bill, food safety bill, and the same one passed in America. Oh, the food safety, yeah.
And you're saying that was coordinated?
Yeah, I noticed you write for the site Global Research, and ever since they passed those bills, they haven't wrote nothing on this site about that. Maybe you can update that site for us? That'd be awesome, because I don't see any info on that after it passed. I found some info before they passed, but after they passed, I found nothing on that site. I noticed you and your brother write for it, so maybe you guys can update it.
We don't control that website. They just use our articles, but they are based in Canada, so maybe you should contact them directly. Thanks for the call. Dwayne in Pennsylvania, you're on the air with Bob Chapman. Go ahead, Dwayne.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Bob. I was wondering if I could read one sentence from the biography of Owen Young and ask Bob whether this scenario could take place in our day. Here it is. It says, in 1919, Owen D. Young, at the request of the U.S. government, created the Radio Corporation of America to combat threatened foreign control of America's struggling radio industry. Do you think that could happen again in our day?
Anything could happen from a corporate viewpoint. And so many of these companies that do a great deal of business in America and elsewhere, transnational corporations. And so anything is possible. You've just seen free trade and globalization create 8.5 million job losses and the loss of 42,400 businesses in the United States, and it's continuing apace. And that kind of thing, that drawing together of companies in monopolistic fashion, is possible in every industry.
Seems like they had more of a protectionist type of attitude at that time, where they wanted to nurture a growing American industry, and today it seems to be just the opposite, while they're encouraging offshore production.
And that's true. And they will do it as long as we allow them. And I don't know how much help we're going to get from the House and Senate, because we just saw them extend the Patriot Act. And these were supposedly the people who were going to go in and change that, and they didn't do that. And so where are we now? We needed to throw more people out of office. We were unable to accomplish that. So that avenue, at least for 2 more years, is relatively closed for us. And again, we have to hold our breath and hope for the best.
Thanks for the call, Dwayne. Yeah, I mean, we had, 26 Republicans that voted against the Patriot Act measures being extended on Tuesday. And then last night, 22 of them, of course, Ron Paul was consistent in voting against it. 22 of these Republicans, most of which are Tea Party members who are supposed to be interested in protecting individual rights and limiting the power of big government, just flipped their votes and voted for it. And what are these provisions? It's about the lone wolf provision, being able to conduct surveillance on Americans with basically no oversight whatsoever. You don't even need to prove that they've got any links to terrorism. They just say they need to conduct the surveillance, and it happens. Warrantless wiretapping. Chris in Pennsylvania, you're on the air with Bob Chapman. Go ahead.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Paul. I just wanted to ask you, first of all, if you'd seen the article. I think I emailed it in, but I don't know if anyone saw it. Because Bob was just saying about how it's important, to have something to be able to protect ourselves, and when he was talking about food. And there's a, from the Catholic News Service, there's an article that says, gun control, church firmly, quietly opposes firearms for civilian ownership. And it goes in there and it talks about how now that the Pope is telling people they need to turn their guns in, and that it's evil to own guns, and private gun ownership is firearms he says that firearms in the hands of civilians should be strictly limited and eventually completely eliminated. And I never really heard you guys cover that, so I thought that was kind of interesting. And also, I thought was interesting, I wanted to ask you, I've heard of this mine to buy stock in called Santa Fe Gold, and I wanted to kind of ask Bob, what was the benefit of owning the gold bullion over buying the stock in the gold mine, since the company is growing, and if gold is going to do so well, what would be the advantages of that?
Well, I don't know Santa Fe, but I do know that historically, gold and silver shares have done well. During the 1930s, they went up over 500%, while gold doubled, and that was a deflationary depression. During the inflationary recession between 1977 and 1981, the average gold and silver share went up 40 times the advance of gold bullion. So shares have performed very well historically. I would say that they will perform as well, if not better, in the future. That's a very, very conservative statement. But you don't have the gold and silver in your hand either. And so I think people should do both, and whatever is suitable for them. And so that's the way I approach gold and silver, bullion and coins, and shares together. And everybody's different, and lots of people write to me, and I answer everybody and tell you what I think, and I helped a lot of people. Again, what was the first part of that question before that?
Actually, I was telling you about, I was just pointing out to Paul that I had sent in an article.
Oh, yes, I got it now. The Catholic Church in guns.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Pope wants people who are civilians to get rid of their guns.
Exactly. Yeah, and they're telling people that.
Are you familiar with his background during the Second World War?
Yeah, actually, I am. Yeah.
Well, do you want me to get into that or not?
Not really. I mean, I just kind of thought it was interesting that now all of a sudden we're hearing this. You're always talking about gun control. Gun control. And here now that the Catholic Church, priests are now promulgating this message that owning guns is evil and that you shouldn't be doing this. And then I think it's kind of interesting that they're attacking it from that front also. They're attacking it from the pulpit, and they're if they can get people to think that it's evil, that might be one other way they can get them out of.
Well, I mean, you know what?
Well, that's the same thing you said between 1939 and 1945.
Yeah, but also the FEMA recruitment program is training pastors to teach their flock to submit to government. In the case of martial law, we brought that story 3 or 4 years ago, and it was since confirmed. So they're actually recruiting these preachers to tell people to submit to government, and of course that involves surrendering their firearms. So no surprise that they would be telling them that. Thanks for the call. We're going to come back to Bob Chapman after the break for the final segment of the Alex Jones Show. We got Joe in Texas coming up. Sorry to the other callers. I think we'll just have time for Joe. And we'll be back after this short break. Stay tuned. PrisonPlanet.tv. It's the Alex Jones Show live with Bob Chapman. Final segment of the Alex Jones Show with Bob Chapman. Bob, quickly tell people how they can get their hands on the International Forecaster.
Well, the forecast is about business, finance, economics, and social and political issues all over the world. We publish by email on Wednesdays and Saturdays, runs around 40 pages each time. We have a hard copy that goes out twice a month for those who are not on the Internet. All the things that you need to know each week are in that publication. You can get a free introductory copy by going to theinternationalforecaster.com. theinternationalforecaster.com. You can also go to www.intforecaster.com. That's intforecaster.com. If you have questions, you can email us at bob, B-O-B, at intforecaster.com. Or you can call toll-free 877-479-8178. That's 877-479-8178. And Ted Anderson has a terrific deal there for you to get a free 1-year subscription of the Forecaster. Take advantage of it. It's a terrific deal.
Okay, Joe in Texas, final caller. Go ahead quickly, please.
Yes, Paul, great job. And Bob, it's an honor. I wanted to ask you about pertaining to silver, since silver is used so much in the electronic field, Bob, that I just wanted to inquire and see how long, in your opinion, Bob, can they keep, because I'm invested in silver, and how long can they keep manipulating this price like they are? And, it's going to will it eventually be affecting like the electronic industry? And that's all. I'll listen off air. Thank you.
The electronics industry is going to suffer the same as the food industry is, as the price of silver goes higher. And as it goes higher, they'll have to try to find other conductors that will do the job, maybe not as good, but probably at a much less price. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know. Each situation is different. There is a lawsuit, which has been consolidated, class action. There were 7 of them. One of them was RICO lawsuit against JPM and HSBC for rigging the silver market. I heard Max Kaiser say with Alex recently that Andrew Maguire, who blew the whistle on these people for what they were doing, has more evidence to present, and that this is going to put people in jail. And so I hope Andrew Maguire is well protected. But once this happens, the price of silver is going to break out and explode because of the enormous naked short position. So you want to be in it. You want to be in gold as well, but silver probably in the short term could be very, very explosive.
Okay, thanks for the call, Joe. Slamming a quick one. Carrie, you're on the air. Go ahead. Carrie in Georgia.
Hey, my question's really easy. It's kind of off topic. If you have family members that you want to like get them to tune in and listen to you guys and be made aware of some of the stuff that maybe the younger generation is listening to on the alternative news, and what is the best way to tell them to tune in? Can they tune in on AM or FM? Is there a way to pick it up without satellite radio?
Yeah, there's a list of AM and FM stations on Infowars.com. Obviously, they can tune in via the internet, prisonplanet.com, or via the iPhone. And all those stations are listed on Infowars.com in the Listen Live section. Thanks for the time, Bob. We've come to the end of the show. We'll talk to you next Friday. Bob Chapman, the internationalforecaster.com. I'll be back in studio with Aaron Dykes on Monday. So stay tuned for that. Keep your entries coming in for V for Victory campaign. This is the Alex Jones Show, prisonplanet.tv.
Visit Infowars.com and prisonplanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.